Hey everyone, welcome back to Marketing Trends. This is your host, Jeremy Bergeron, Vice President of Media Strategy at mission.org. Thank you so much for stopping by again. Today, we have an awesome guest in Tim Metzner. He's the co-founder of Coterie Insurance. He's that, but he's also a lot more than that. And Tim, thank you so much for being here, man. I'm honored. I know our audience is honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it, Jeremy.
Yeah, man. I got excited about checking out some of the things you've done in the past. You have a cool, you have a interesting background. I saw Ocean's Programs? Is that what it's called?
Ocean Programs, yes.
Yeah, Ocean Programs. And so I personally love the spiritual component of your background too, and really, and you care a lot about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And so
Yes.
immediately I became a fan. I'm like, yep, okay, he's a homie. So I want to know kind of where it started for you though, Tim. Typically what I love to do in the beginning is just kind of, what is the genesis of marketing and entrepreneurship for you? Like, when did that start for you and what was it?
Yeah, man, I can't even put a finger on it exactly to tell you when, other than at some point I realized kind of heading into college, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I always tell people, like, honestly, it's probably a seed planted by God, because I did not grow up around entrepreneurships. Going into college, I probably could not have even defined it for you very well, but I just had this idea that I wanted to be a business owner someday. And I was fortunate enough to get into an honor scholarship program at the University of Cincinnati that paid my way through school.
Ah,
And that program was really built for like the future corporate leaders of Cincinnati. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. We've got great companies like Procter and Gamble and Fifth Third and Kroger that are headquartered there. And so they really wanted to kind of fight the brain drain. They created this amazing program really to kind of build the future corporate leaders. I got into the program. As part of that, you require mandatory co-op, which meant you go to work every other quarter. So most people in the program went to work at Kroger and Fifth Third and Procter and Gamble and these amazing companies. And I went to work for an entrepreneur. I met a guy who had built and sold his first company to eBay. This is kind of early 2000s. And his story just blew my mind, like what he was able to accomplish with a small team in Cincinnati, Ohio that no one had even heard about. And I just wanted to pull on that thread. So went to work for him and decided if I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, the best way to do that is to go work for one, right? So I did that. And, one of the things I fell in love with right away is like, there's a million things you got to figure out in a startup. Like anyone who's been a part of it gets that. And I both loved that challenge and kind of self-selected into the marketing stuff. Like right away, one of our big challenges was customer acquisition. Like, how do we acquire users? And this was a direct to consumer play. And so I just started reading everything I could, experimenting, learning, and kind of leaning in there.
That's awesome. So was there, are there any books or mentors that kind of pop out and stick out as you started to now go down that path of marketing? Who are some of the influencers or something in that range that actually helped kind of cultivate this in you?
Man, I don't even remember specifics other than I was reading any blog I could get my hands on at the time. There was a lot of like just marketing leaders who were writing blogs.
Cool.
There's definitely the Seth Godins out there of the world, certainly like people who are, more high level, but there was a lot of just, this was before like growth marketing was even a term, but there were people who were kind of espousing their own learnings on what it looks like to be a growth. How do you acquire customers in the new kind of digital age? I remember I chose to study marketing in school and I loved my program, but it was a marketing program built for like a future brand manager at Procter and Gamble, not digital customer acquisition or, kind of digital marketing era. So that stuff I was kind of learning on my own and, reading whatever blog I could get my hands on and, trying to meet up with I remember going to some conferences and really just like making friends with other people in the space that, this is going back 20 plus years now. So it's dated, but yeah, I think it was just going down whatever rabbit holes I could find.
Were there, what style of marketing, I guess, from a tactician, like when you're actually doing marketing, like, were you doing traditional stuff early? Like, were you getting on Facebook and Google ads and doing campaigns? Like, what were some of the early actual marketing, things you were doing?
Yeah, well, to date myself, this was pre-Facebook, so there was no social media at the time. So it was a whole lot of SEO and paid search was kind of mostly. But one of the things I loved was like I got to dabble in everything. Like I was doing print media, so did print ads in magazines. I remember, way back when Google was dabbling in radio and TV as well. So I was doing radio, TV, and print, in addition to SEM and
Wow.
SEO with our team. And just honestly having a lot of fun kind of experimenting with all different forums and channels, and trying to bring it all together and figure out like what was actually working, what wasn't working. And so yeah, got to dabble in quite a bit of everything, honestly, early on.
Wow. So when you look now as, a co-founder and leading the folks there at Coterie, when you look at and think of marketing now, do you still kind of have is the wheelhouse pretty big of the marketing mix of things that you're doing? Because you have cool stuff in traditional, we're in the digital age now. So when you approach marketing now, what does that look like?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously it's evolved, right? Like the tactics are similar, but some of the outlets and tools and things like that have evolved. And I'd be lying if I said I kept up with those very well. Instead, I've hired really smart people who do a great job of keeping up with trends and the latest things. But I do believe it requires, like, just like a startup, like you got to be adaptive, right? Like there's so much of kind of test and learn and see what works. And a lot of it just has to start with, like, what does the customer want? Like meeting them where they are, using that, like speaking to them in a language they understand, communicating to them via means that make sense to them. Like, I think that's all the same. Those means have changed over time, and I think we have to continue to adapt to those. But yeah, I think it's much of the same approach of, take a holistic a view of, like, where can I meet someone? And you just start with, like, what problems do they have? And, like, let's think about, like, how can we solve problems for people, and where can we meet them to talk about those problems?
So can you talk about kind of how Coterie began, right? I mean, you and there's two co-founders. Is it you and another co-founder?
Three of us total.
Three.
So,
Okay, so
yep.
you two co-founders. You talk about kind of the logic that went into starting this through API first, and what opportunity you saw kind of from the outside looking in.
Absolutely. So I'll share kind of a couple of views of this. One is just kind of my own journey. The other is our CEO's kind of background. So CEO, co-founder David McFarland, he's a lifer insurance guy. He'll tell you he's an insurance nerd. He's an actuary through and through. He's been in insurance since he graduated from college. And so he's kind of been pulling on this thread since, his very early career of, like, man, no one is really leveraging data and technology in the way that they could to sell commercial insurance specifically, right? So you can think about insurance, to overly simplify it, there's personal lines like home and auto, right? And then there's business lines, commercial, like small business insurance. And while there's been quite a bit of innovation on the personal line side, think Root and Lemonade and some of these kind of famous insurtech IPOs, not as much has happened on the commercial side. So that was a thread that, David continued to pull on throughout his journey in insurance. And then he went to work for a jewelry insurance company called Jewelers Mutual. And they figured out, if you embed insurance into a cart when someone's buying jewelry, turns out, like, you'll get really good uptake, right? Like, you're buying an engagement ring. If I offer you insurance right now as you're buying that, like, a couple things. Number one, that, whatever that $100, couple $100, whatever the policy is, like, compared to the $1,000 you're spending on that ring, you're like, oh, that's well worth it, right? Number two, like, it pretty much eliminates fraud. Like, no one's going to buy a ring just so they can buy insurance on that ring and then file a claim, right? So there were some really interesting things that happened at kind of point of sale. And that was another nugget that David just saw and said, man, I think there's opportunities to do that for small business insurance as well, to put it in places of relevance. So that was kind of a thread he was pulling on. For my own journey, I'm serial co-founder, started a few companies. It'd gone pretty well, no massive, unicorn exits or anything like that. But one of the things I realized a number of years ago was, like, we pivoted, I'll spare you the details, but we created a company called Differential that ended up turning into a services company, really focused on kind of digital innovation, outsourced, like, digital product development for hire, kind of is a good way to think about it. And at some point I realized, like, holy cow, we have 30 people who love their jobs. Like, we have engineers still today, this is whatever, 7-8 years later, who still work for Differential. And I know they get pinged with job offers weekly, and we pay decent salary, but we're not like the Google, engineer salary. Like, that's not why people are staying at Differential. Like, that's just crazy. Like, and that the thing I realized at some point was, like, not only do they enjoy their jobs, like, these people are more active in their community. They picked up hobbies. They're like better parents and spouses. Like, they've kind of come alive, not in their career, but in their lives. And so I started pulling on that thread with myself. I'm like, man, I feel like there's there's a chance to take a bigger swing. Like, what if you could build a company in a space that if it went well, it could go really well, and maybe you could create a couple thousand of those kind of jobs, not just 30. So that's what kind of led me into insurance. Like, number one, we were trying to sell digital innovation services into that category, and I just realized, holy cow, you can turn in any direction in commercial insurance and build a company. Like, you can almost stumble into building a tech first company. Like, just so much opportunity to build with a data technology mindset. And number two, I just loved the idea that you could build 100-year company that could have a massive impact on a community, right? Like, look at some of the best cities around the world. Like, the people who've been around, the companies that have been around, like, they're insurance companies. They've donated millions of dollars to the community. They've created thousands of jobs. They've been around for, decades and decades. And like, if you want to have impact, like, that's a really cool way to do it. So that was kind of in the back of my mind, was like, if I could find a category like that, pair with a domain expert in David, and then our third co-founder, Kevin, is just a massively talented operations guy. And I learned early on in my journey, like, ops is not my forte. If I'm ever going to start a company, I need someone who can keep the trains running on time, because that's not my jam.
Well, that's awesome. It's cool. It's kind of a three-legged stool that you guys have, being the co-founders of that. It's very cool. I love the conversation, man. He was a really, really cool cat. And I'm excited about the growth there. And I think the opportunity for Coterie is massive. I'm beginning to see that more and more by this conversation. So you've got the three co-founders, you've domain expertise, you've got, you've got this real desire from you three to build a cool culture,
Yes.
to actually mean it and not just give lip service to the idea culture. And I know culture is important to you. And so I want to kind of understand some of the thinking that goes into building the high performance team there, infusing culture in marketing and everything that you're doing there as a leader.
Yeah, I think, like, it just requires continuous intentional focus. Like, it's one of those things early on, it's kind of funny, like, depending on the investor or the entrepreneur you talk to, like, some people will tell you, like, don't worry about it, right? Until there's a there, until you've got a company, like, don't worry about things like culture, like that, and don't focus too much on, values and vision and some of that. And I'm like, man, I just think that's the wrong approach, because if things do start to take off and you make it, like, you're going to have a culture either way. Like, you can either be intentional about that and create that, or, it can kind of happen on its own. And I just believe, like, if you want to attract people who are not only really talented, but just great human beings, like, you got to have a vision for the kind of company you want to build, and you want to attract them to that. Like, you want people to self-select into your values, your culture, into what you're building, so that they're really bought into that. They want to be a part of it. They want to take it to the next level, right? And so, early on, like, if you decide to focus on it, I think it's fantastic. I think it's actually relatively easy. Like, you've got a small group of people around the table, like, you're sharing very openly everything that's going on. Like, it is, very much a small team environment. As you scale, though, like, especially if you're going to raise outside venture capital, right? Like, the pressure to go faster, to accomplish more, to hit marks, like, just to do the blocking and tackling, like, that mounts. And so it's really easy to start out and say, like, we're going to build a great culture, and a great company. And then all of a sudden the pressure starts to mount on we got to really build a great company, like, really hit some marks, really hit our numbers. And, like, it's easy to let this one slip. I think the way you avoid that is, like, you have regular rhythms of talking about it. Like, so talk about it at we have a co-founders meeting every week still to this day. The three of us get together and say, like, what are we hearing from the team? What are the red flags? What are the roadblocks? And most of that ends up being kind of people and culture focused. Like, a lot of that, there's some tactical stuff we deal with too, but a lot of it really is, like, what are the cultural things that we might need to deal with? So I think creating space for that is important, but that's not just amongst the co-founders. Like, you have to have rhythms of hearing from your whole team. As you scale, it gets really easy to lose sight of what's happening on the front lines. Like, what's that customer service, that customer advocate hearing and seeing and feeling? So one of the things we implemented is called core coaching. And that just is every 3 weeks, everyone in the company has a one-on-one with usually their manager, but someone more senior in the company. And that entire one-on-one is focused on hearing from them. So hearing from them about what they're seeing, feeling, thinking we need to do better. And also just about them and their career. It's like, hey, Jeremy, I know you have career aspirations. Those might be beyond Coterie. awesome. Like, we want to help you get there. So long as I understand where you're trying to go and you understand where we're trying to go, like, we can have this beautiful alliance between us where we're helping each other along the way. And hopefully Coterie will evolve and we can actually help you achieve those career aspirations even within our walls. But either way, we're going to have an open, honest dialogue about that so that you don't get surprised and we don't get surprised. And, that in and of itself is a huge part of building great culture, because it just builds like trust and openness and transparency that, I think a lot of companies lack, frankly.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think a lot of companies will talk about it, and then when it comes down to, the implementation of creating and cultivating a safe space and a safe container for team members and, and folks to come in. And I love how you kind of frame that of like, hey, we may not be your destination, but we have our destination, and there's some alignment of how we can actually, hey, you may go somewhere else, but wow, let's make sure that we're heading there, and we're helping you, accelerate your own path.
Yeah. And then they also get to be the canary in the coal mine. Like, they're going to, if they're bought into culture, like, they'll let you know what they're feeling and seeing and hearing. Like, here are some red flags. And what I always ask questions like, who are you working with that's crushing it? Who are you working with that you're worried about? Right. And it's not meant to be a finger pointing, he said, she said. It's like, hey, we care about each other. We're going to lift each other up. If you have problems, you should address it with that individual. But I also need to make sure that there's not something affecting your day job. Like, my job is to help you do your best work. The only way for that to happen is to hear from you on a regular basis.
How much did you guys raise in the Series A?
11.5 million in the Series A, and then some venture debt on top of that, and then 50 million Series B.
50, congrats on all that. And then,
thank you.
To your point earlier, now you add an extra layer, right? You have an extra, you have extra fuel, right? But that also adds, not pressure necessarily, it can, but like, wow, now you have other stakeholders involved. You've got other, targets and goals, and so. Were you part of the active fundraising yourself? Or is that kind of were you going out as a team, the co-founders, or were you out raising the money, or what did that look like?
So that's kind of evolved. Early on, it was much more of a co-founder effort. And then David, our CEO, took that over and basically handled the entire Series B himself, which is, as you continue to scale, like, it just becomes an increasing part of your job as CEO and founder, right? Like and one of the other things we try and do at Coterie, for everyone, is like, let people leverage their superpowers. David is fantastic at like externally telling the Coterie story to investors. Like, his vision and his background in the insurance world, it just works really, really well to tell that story. So, we want to lean into that and put him in a space to win. And, he did a really great job of that. And then pulling us in as needed to answer questions, get through due diligence, things like that.
So how are you using data, like, to inform the digital strategy?
So it's really interesting. This is actually, I would say, an area of growth for me specifically. Becoming more data driven as an individual is an area of kind of personal growth. The company as a whole does a fantastic job of this. But when you're CEO as an actuary, you tend to be pretty heavily data focused, which works out well. I realized this, I was kind of reflecting on this. I'm like, why has being like, I've always considered myself a data-driven marketer, but it's been harder to lean into that more recently in terms of like making strategic decisions based on data. And what occurred to me is like, so much of my career has been like 0 to 1, early stage. Like, when you're in the 0 to 1 phase, like, you don't have any data. Like, it is almost all gut feel, right? Like, you can do market research, you can lean into customer, interviews and look at your kind of early data points. But, until you have water running through the pipes, like, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to optimize. Right. And so I think that's what's been interesting for me is like, as I start to build amazing people around me, is there's a really great opportunity to look at data, across the entire company. And obviously, as a data first or API data first organization, like, we're leaning into data heavily. So we think about kind of three ways we're innovating: speed, simplicity, and service. So we believe like that's how we're going to innovate across commercial insurance over time. If you think about data, like, it can help with every single one of those, right? Speed for us. So on the front end, a lot of the clunky process with insurance is filling out an application. So by leaning into data, like we can actually pre-fill your application or most of your application, kind of depending on our point of sale. Like, are we integrated in a flow where the data already exists and we can just kind of pre-populate your application? If not, can we leverage third-party data to do that? And like, what's interesting is like, not only is that faster, it's oftentimes more accurate than like you sitting down with an agent and sort of guessing about what your numbers are, or, fumbling through it kind of quickly. Um, Simplicity, right? Like, again, we're taking that like clunky couple day back and forth process of answering questions and like simplifying it down to like, here's a couple things we need to know from you. We'll get the rest, right? And then service, like you can really start to lean on data to say like, what are the biggest bottlenecks? What are the challenges our customers are having at every part of the journey? Like from the early discovery journey to I'm now a policy holder. And we have multiple stakeholders, right? So we have the policy holders that we serve, and we have agents and brokers and partners who are kind of selling Coterie on our behalf. So we can use data to say what challenges are they all having along the journey, and how might we either build kind of better communication or better tools to take it, or to kind of alleviate some of those blockers along the way.
What are some of those challenges that you uncovered that they were having?
The biggest one tends to be upfront, just figuring out how to classify myself. Like, if you're not an insurance expert, and no small business owner is,
Right,
like,
right.
you don't know what the insurance company wants to put. Like, I'm a bakery, right? And I might just write down bakery, and then like there might be a follow-up of like 16 different versions of a bakery, and you're like, holy cow, I have no idea. Like, I don't even know how to think about this, right? So we realized like one of the biggest bottlenecks was just classifying, like, what do you actually do? So like, okay, if that's true, like we can create some data mappings to make that really easy, so that you can use kind of, common language. Like, let's let you enter something like bakery, and then let's do our best job at like answering those follow-up questions for you, and then let you verify, right? So we can use data to simplify that, and then say, is this accurate, versus, hey, here's 16 variations of, plumber that you might be. Tell me which one you are. And, inevitably, a lot of times it's like, well, kind of all of those, right? Like, now I really don't know what to do here. So that's not a problem we've completely solved, but just identifying that as a big hurdle is like, okay, let's think about like, what kind of UI UX approach can we take to solving this problem to make it, a lot easier? Or how can we use third-party data to, get all the information we need to, maybe we trim that tree down to 3 possibilities, right, instead of 16.
That's awesome. There's two things I want to hit on with that. And the first is simplicity, and it's interesting, as I have such a privilege of getting to connect with some folks, like yourself, that are all along the scale, right? Scaling from 6 to 7 figures, and 7 to 8, and 8 to 9, and 9 on up. And so it's interesting to kind of see the through line in these organizations across industries. It seems like many of them, a lot of them, I would say the majority of the ones that are quote unquote successful in growth, is that idea of simplicity. They haven't added just unnecessary complexity, which sometimes entrepreneurs and humans can do. Yes. And so keeping that, I love how that's just a core part of what you and the team comes back to, is like, how can we make sure we do this at every stage? Because yes, that simplicity is not going to go. It could go away, but I'm hoping it doesn't and stays through, because I've seen how when that through line is there, oh man, I mean, a magic happens literally everywhere, talking about the culture and certainly growth and really understanding customers and being at the right intersection of, the conversation that's happening between the customer and yourself. And so I love that you're focused on that. That's cool.
I appreciate that. And we kind of realize, I think we have to be. Here's the dirty secret. Entrepreneurs don't give a crap about insurance. They don't like it, right? It's not something they want to think about. Seriously, like, it is something you need, right? Like, and you could argue like, yeah, the government tells me I have to get workers' comp for my employees. Like, sure. Also, like, it's a social good. Like, part of why, many of us were so excited about Coterie and the problems we're solving is like, we believe that small business owners are like the backbone of America. Like, it is where most of jobs are created. Like, it is such a hard job. It's really hard, difficult work. And it's also critically important to our communities, right? It's crazy. I've seen some stats where as much as like 40% of small businesses don't have insurance. And that kind of breaks my heart, because what you're doing is putting not just your company and your livelihood at risk, but also those jobs, right? those critical employees that you have created a spot for them to work, to earn a living, to put food on the table. Like, you have one bad event and you're not covered for that catastrophic event. Like, it's game over.
Right,
You don't
right.
get another shot. So, as much as, we believe, like, we joke about like insurance isn't important, no one really cares about it. Like, it is critically important for many small business owners if they want to have, want to be able to weather the storm, like literally, right? And kind of get through that. So we see it as an opportunity to kind of serve them well. And yeah, I think that will continue to be a focus of kind of Coterie, is like really thinking about how do we serve that small business owner.
Yeah. I mean, of course, you hit a soft spot with the SMB world. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly that they're so important,
Yeah.
and especially now. I mean, there's a myriad of reasons why,
Yes.
but they really are so important to the world. And so, and I love that that's also the focus. It's like, how do we really serve and support these folks and put them in positions to win, and also
Yes.
help protect them. Are you seeing a shift in? Because I know, like you said, look, entrepreneurs, they don't want to mess with insurance, right? And so, yeah, it's this kind of necessary thing that should be considered. Is there a lot of education that you're having to do, like telling the story, explaining why? Or are you spending a lot of time on that experience for the possible customer and the customer, or is it another angle?
Yes, no, it really is. There's definitely a lot of information, education that has to go out there. And it's not just directly, we're not a direct to small business company, right? We're not trying to target small business owners directly. We go through partners, but we need to arm our partners with that same information, right? So just teeing them up with language, and creating content on our own that can help to answer, some of the, or really dispel some of the myths, or help people understand why it's important, help them think about how, I should think about it. It's different, right? Like, if I'm back to our examples of like a bakery and a, plumber, like very different needs or reasons that you might want insurance, right? So having the ability to kind of talk to people again in a language that actually makes sense to them is really important. So, and there's, thousands and thousands of class codes of businesses that we sell insurance to. So like, there's a long roadmap of content we can create to help educate people that speaks directly to them. And we want to empower our partners to do that, certainly, but we believe that's sort of our opportunity as well, to create information. And again, honestly, it's not just about insurance either. Like, I have a heart for small business, sounds like you do as well. Like, we want to help them be better entrepreneurs. Like, many people don't start a business because they're great at starting businesses. It's because they have a thing they love doing, right? Or they realize they're really good at a thing. So we want to help educate them on, like, what does it look like to actually work on the business, not just in the business? Like, how can we use some of our own past experiences as business owners to help kind of educate people along the way, not just about insurance, but about making their business a better business. So really are trying to be kind of good partners to them, holistically, not just with their insurance needs over time.
I like that. That's great. That's fantastic. What is the role of AI and machine learning, right, in the future of kind of selling business insurances? And are you using any of that currently in your marketing?
Not a whole lot today. Over time, we'll lean into it a lot more heavily. Can't speak to it in too much detail today, but I can tell you the way insurance companies historically win is they have a data advantage. Honestly, it's like, if you are able to look at different sources of data or data differently than anyone else can, and use that to segment and to price differently, you win. That's kind of the story of insurance companies. And so we believe, as a company that has started with data at its core and the ability to actually ingest data from all different kinds of sources, like from our partners, from third parties, from folks, directly, from public sources of data. Like, we just think there's going to be some really unique opportunities for us to kind of segment and look at that over time. As an early stage company, we're not doing a ton of that quite yet, but we've got some early experiments going, and pretty bullish on our ability to kind of win by leaning into that.
Can you give like an example of maybe a marketing campaign at Coterie that has performed better than expected? Maybe something where you made some adjustments and it's like, oh wow, this is happening.
Yeah, one that comes to mind is actually, it's kind of a little bit different, where I'd call it more of a remarketing effort that actually turned out pretty good. So
Okay.
back to our conversation about education, one of the things we realized, is like, people don't necessarily love talking about insurance, but they do understand that they have risks as a business owner, right? So one of the things we put together is something called a risk assessment. So instead of saying, here's the insurance thing you should buy, we said, hey, would you like an assessment of the risk that your business has today? So leveraging some data that we have access to, we were able to put together this risk assessment that we could send either to an agent to give to a business owner or directly to a business owner that would say, based on where you are, what your business is, what kind of building you're operating in, things like that, like here's a profile of some risks you might have. And here's some ways you can mitigate those risks if that's important to you, right? So we tested that thinking like, I don't know, maybe it would be interesting, like maybe people would like it. And I can't share data on it, but I can tell you there was a pretty significant lift in conversion to insurance policies. Like,
Wow.
turns out when people start to connect the dots between I'm buying this policy because I have these risks, like it makes it a lot more likely that they're going to buy that policy, right? So that was a real interesting one that we weren't sure how it would be received. And now we're kind of like, how do we use this more? Maybe even use this up front before you're even asking at all about insurance. Like, can we use this as a way to start to help educate people? So that one's been a lot of fun to play with.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that. It's like if you're helping see where I'm exposed, and
That's right.
you're going to help. That's awesome. That's fantastic. And then I love the surprise of like, wow, this is actually makes a significant impact, and the data is not lying. So that's really,
and it's adding value, regardless
Sure.
of whether or not you buy a policy. Like, we're adding value to you as an entrepreneur. Like, you're more informed and hopefully in a better spot.
What are some of the ways that you pivoted at Coterie, like both for consumers and for your own staff in the last 18 months?
I'd say for our own staff, it's been somewhat limited because we built Coterie as a remote first company from the beginning. So that, it's kind of all three of us co-founders, it's not our first rodeo. We've all started other businesses before. So it was kind of interesting. We got to bring our unique experiences to the table. And one of those things we all agreed on was like, man, there's no reason to limit ourselves to talent just in Cincinnati, Ohio. As much as I love Cincinnati,
Sure.
like, there are amazing people all over the place who want to have freedom and flexibility to work for a great company, right from where they are. So we leaned into that early on. So we had already built great tools and kind of processes and systems for working remote, which has been a huge advantage for us, going into COVID, obviously. So not a huge shift there. I think maybe leaning into the conversation around mental health, though, has been something where, again, we've always focused on our team and wanting to create great space for them. But like, we have an unlimited PTO policy, which many startups do. And oftentimes, like, what that ends up looking like is no one takes vacation. Like, they're like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to take. And so, whatever, I'll just keep working. We're like, okay, unlimited PTO, but you have to take 2 weeks. We're going to require you take some time off. And we're going to encourage regularly, like, one of the questions we ask our leaders all the time is, who on your team is stressed right now? Who needs to take some time and space? Who hasn't taken time off in a while? Like, go have a conversation with them and have them schedule something. I don't care if it's an afternoon, a day, a week, like, create some time and space for them to unplug for a while and actually honor that, right? Don't bother them when they're off. So I think we've been a lot more intentional about leaning into like, hey, this has been a weird time for everyone, right? We're all struggling in very unique and different ways. Like, make sure that people are taking time to care for themselves and their families and those around them.
I love that. I think it's similar to, I was working with a mentor of mine, Alex Sharfin, for a year or so, and they had wellness days, and they didn't have there was no sick days. Like, there was no sick days, but you had wellness days, and you absolutely had to take these days. Like,
Nice.
I think it was literally like, I want to think it was like bi-monthly or something. It was like, you're getting like a consistent opportunity. It's the whole day. And if you're not, whoever you're reporting to is like, hey, you got to take the day. And so I love how they were really nudging us, because to your point, everyone does unlimited PTO now. And a lot of times when you hire amazing high performers and they love what they do, they just keep doing it, sometimes to their own detriment of like, I still need to treat myself like a human and take some time. So I love that. A lot of big organizations are not doing that. And that's okay. But man, imagine the kind of culture you can create and the kind of speed you can move when you really, you make that like, hey, you have to do this. And I love that.
It's like, startups are hard. Yes, there are going to be long nights and weekends, no doubt about it. Like, you have to do that at times. but it's like, unless you're building for a quick exit, which we're not, like it's a marathon. Like we want to build a great long-term sustainable company. Like you can't churn through people. Like you just can't do that. And if you don't have people take time off regularly, you will, like, they're gonna burn out. And like, the cost to the business, forget the human side of it, which like, it's just the right thing to do. You and I both know that, that's
Right,
clear, right?
right,
But the
right,
cost to the business is also significant. Like replacing that burnt out employee, like,
right,
number one, it's not like they just leave as soon as they're burned out, right? Like they're actually kind of burned out in place for quite a
right.
bit of time. And like
Exactly,
that is a
exactly.
drag on everyone around them.
Yep, yep.
And then when you do realize it and, you have to replace them or do something, like the cost to bring someone new in, like the time investment requires to get someone up to speed, like it doesn't make sense to treat people like that, again, from a human standpoint or a business standpoint.
I love that, man. You mentioned wanting to have a multi-generational impact on your Twitter bio. How do you use your role like to do that? How are you doing that? What does that look like? I love that, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Man, I think I talked about it a lot already. Like it's a big part of what drew me to this company, to this opportunity, to this industry. Like there's just such a chance to build a great long-term legacy type company. And we talked about this earlier on in the interview, but I just love seeing people come alive in their careers because it trickles over into their personal lives, and vice versa, right? So like treating people as humans, building a great place for them to work, like if you can do that, the impact you can have on a community is massive. Because again, like we all become better humans when that 40 plus hours a week that we're dedicating to work is enjoyable. Like when we leave energized at the end of the day, when we leave actually wanting to come back and do more work, like we just have so much fire, to go do other good stuff in our lives. And so that's a big part of it for me, is like if you can create a great place to work, create great jobs, create an environment where people feel valued and trusted and respected, like there's so much good that can come from that. So that plus the idea of we want to build a fantastically successful company that, insurance is a great industry with like really great potential for long-term profit. Like to me, like I get excited about reinvesting that in my community and other entrepreneurs and our employees. Like that to me is just, there's so much long-term potential there that excites me.
I love that. It's awesome. Um, Anything else you want to make sure we cover? I've got some kind of lightning round questions we can get into, but this has been awesome. We have a little bit, we have some space. If there's anything, other topics you're like, oh, I want to go down that rabbit hole, let me know.
Yeah, one that's kind of near and dear to my heart is this idea of like balance, work-life balance.
Let's do it.
A lot of people hate the term work-life balance. Like, if you hate that term, you're doing it wrong. I'm sorry. Like, if that term really bothers you, you're probably swinging too far on one extreme or the other. And there's no perfect balance. I agree with that. Like that is absolutely true. But we have to be really intentional about like, look, for me, I think the greatest impact I might actually have is probably on my 4 kids, not on my work. Like, I think we'll do amazing things through Coterie. Like, if my wife and I do our job well as parents, like these 4 kids might actually do way more than we will. So like, if I truly believe that, like I better be investing in them also. And I better be creating that example for my team of like, you know what, I'm going to go coach my kids. Like, yes, I'm the founder of this company and I'm crazy busy. I'm still going to step away a couple times a week to go show up at a practice, and invest in my kids. And by doing that and setting that example, like it encourages the rest of the team to consider that as well. And like, not everyone should be a coach, but that's an example of like, what are the ways you can invest outside of work in your community and your family and other ways to impact kind of the world and society around us. So I'm just a firm believer in like, you can have both. Like the early, and you talked about Ocean programs early on, like why I created Ocean, a nonprofit I started, was like, when I first started my first company, the narrative I was reading about all the time was like, to be successful as an entrepreneur, you gotta go all in. Like everything else you gotta put on pause, like friends, family, like hobbies, whatever, all that stuff, be damned for a while. Like you're gonna go all in for the next 5 to 10 years. And maybe, just maybe, you'll make a ton of money at the other end of that. And I'm like, cool. If I do that and I end up divorced with kids who hate me, and no real way to spend that money other than like start another company. Like, how could I count that as success? Right. So for me personally, I was like, man, I believe you can build a great company and make a lot of money doing that, and not be a jerk to people around you and not torture friendships and your family. And like, why can't you do both of those things? So I just encourage people. It's different for everyone what that looks like. And I don't get it right all the time, but I have enough people around me who will call me on my BS, whether it be my wife or my friends. Are like, hey man, you're really swinging, to this extreme of like working, redlining all the time. Like,
Yeah.
we should have a conversation about that. Or like, there's other times in my career where my wife's been like, it kind of seems like you're coasting. Like, are you still fired up? Are you working your tail off? Like,
Wow.
We want to have a big impact as a family. Like, for that to happen, like, I'm working hard to run this family so you can go work hard and build a great company. Like, are you still doing that? Like, both ways, right? So I think, if you have great people and transparency in your relationships, like you can achieve that interesting balance.
That's awesome, man. I love it. Okay, let's get into the lightning round,
Cool.
ask some fun questions, and we'll wrap.
Let's do it.
So Marketing Trends Podcast is brought to you by Salesforce. Salesforce brings marketing and engagement together. Learn more at salesforce.com/marketing. We've got Tim Metzner, co-founder of Coterie Insurance, on. First question: what is the hardest part about working insurance?
Oh man, the fact that you're selling something that people don't want, right? Like I talked about this earlier on, but it is a need. Most people it's not. Look, you don't wake up as an entrepreneur on Saturday excited to go shop for insurance. That's not a thing, right? So we've got to get in front of you at the right time with the right message. That's a challenge.
What is the best part of your role at Coterie?
Building into the team, building into the culture. Everyone gets to do that at Coterie, by the way. That's not a founder job, but as a founder, I do have, a disproportionate lever to pull there, and I enjoy doing that.
Oh, that's great. As a dad to 4 kids, how has being a parent changed the way you view your work and career?
It's made me way more efficient. Like, early on in my career, I was the guy who'd be at the office till all hours of the night, like slaving away. And like, if I look back on that time, like, I wasn't that productive. Like, yes, I was getting stuff done, but I'm just as productive today in a lot fewer hours than I was before. Like, you just get better at like relentlessly prioritizing what matters.
Do you have a favorite book or podcast?
Man, so many good books. Right now, I'm kind of leaning into John Wooden. So
he's
I've
excellent.
been just kind of studying. I think he seems to be one of the greatest leaders all time, and I'm a huge basketball fan as well. So, but pulls on both of the strings for me. But been reading a lot of his stuff lately.
Cool, love it. He's awesome, legendary. I mean,
legendary.
Best advice for a first-time entrepreneur?
Don't try to boil the ocean. There's 2 ways I like to talk about this. Actually, there's kind of 2 points. One is sell painkillers, not vitamins. The quick story there is like, if I leave the house in the morning and I forget to take my vitamin, what's the chances of me stopping off on my way to work to get a multivitamin? 0. If I leave with a headache, what's the chances of me stopping off to get some medicine? Very strong. Not to say you can't build a great vitamin company, but early on, getting traction and momentum is way easier if you're selling a painkiller versus a vitamin. Part 2 of that is build a scalpel, not a Swiss Army knife. Like, we as entrepreneurs, like, you probably have a really big vision about like what you want to do someday, which is awesome. You can't lose sight of that. Like, don't ever lose sight of that big vision. Also, relentlessly focus on doing one thing well first. Like, if you do that, it gives you permission to go solve other problems or add on other features or what have you. But start with doing one thing really well first. Relentlessly focus.
I love that. That's awesome. Tim, thank you so much for being here. This is exceptional. I'm just appreciative of your path and your journey. And of course, being a fellow dad and entrepreneur, I'm in this with you, man. And this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions. Awesome interview, Jeremy. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.